loud. Let's try that. Is that good? Does it say okay, cool. So let me disable annotate because some people like annotate. Okay. Okay. So yeah, typically like his midterms, you're going to be building tables and that's HTML. But in order to like move this data around and kind of fit it so that you're only displaying what he wants you to display, that involves a JavaScript. So let's just go through like the questions one by one. So the first deliverable is just retrieving this data and storing it in a variable called bookstring. So another thing this is just like standard syntax. Whenever you start a question, you do function P1. And that is because like we're basically going to copy our code when we're done and we're going to copy it onto his web page and he has it stored in like this ID. So that's just whenever question you're working on, you're going to like start it like that. Okay, so the first question is telling us to retrieve data. So let's create a variable called bookstring. And following steps to get data is first you're going to use this document property. And basically what that does is it retrieves like it's an object that retrieves HTML content. So whatever I'm going to put after this, it's going to go and look onto our web page and search for that content. So he says right here that our data is contained in a form called form 1. And then it's like the text area is located in that form. So first let's call the form. So it's called form 1. Okay. And then let's retrieve the text area. So as you're going to the right, you're getting more like narrow, So first we're getting on this web page. We're calling the HTML object. Then we're looking in the form. And then inside that form, we're getting the text area. And then we're going to say dot value. And that's like another syntax thing. Just getting like all of this string. So the first deliverable is literally done. All you did was retrieve all that text data. Okay, the next thing is, okay, yeah. So the next 3 things is going to involve us manipulating this string text so that we can like organize it so that when we populate it, it's going to be like really quick. So this is going to be like helping us to build our table. But before we do that, I'm going to create another variable because if you guys remember, like at the very bottom, it says we're going to be looking up total downloads. So that means that we need to keep a count of this number. So I'm just going to make a variable right now and call it total and set it equal to 0. Okay. And then the next thing I'm going to do is I know I'm going to build a table, right? Like right now, this is just JavaScript right here. This is some more JavaScript. Number 6 is where it tells us we're actually going to build this table. So I'm actually going to open up my table tag right now. It's not like critical that you do it at this step. I just like to have all my variable stuff in the beginning. So variable, I'm going to call it OS and I'm going to equal it to, so this is where the HTML comes in. So you guys know with HTML, you format things using tags. So table tag is a tag for the table. And every time you create a table, Dr. Parks likes to use 2 attributes, border and cell spacing. So border, we're going to set it equal to 1. And that's basically these lines right here, like these black lines y'all can see. And then cell spacing is equal to, okay, so whenever like you're going to do these practice exams and on his code, it's going to be 0 because as you can see, there's no space between these individual cells. It's just like cell and then the border and then the next cell. For the purposes of our coding time, I'm going to make cell spacing equal to 3 so that we can actually see the difference when we execute the code. Because once you open this up on his webpage, it's going to default show you this. So you don't actually know if your code worked or not. So that's why if you kind of change it up a little, you can see your actual code. Okay, so that was just opening up the table. So, okay, now let's work on deliverables 2, 3, and 4. So it says replace all the periods with a comma in this string named bookstring. So you're probably wondering, like, how can I go through this whole thing, and every time I see a period, I'm going to turn it into a comma. So we need to create some sort of process that'll like automatically do that for us. We don't have to manually search for every index of a period. So let's create a loop. We're going to create a while loop. I chose while loop because if you guys don't know, like there's while loop and there's for loop. So with the for loop, you like to use that when you know exactly how many iterations you're going to be doing. Right now, we don't necessarily know how many times we're going to find a period. And I know it says top 100 books, so that must mean there's going to be 100 ranks. And oh yeah, I probably should have kind of clarified. On these attributes, it tells you that a rank is followed by a period. The title is followed by the word by. The author is followed by an open parentheses, and the daily downloads is followed by a closing parentheses. So what 2, 3, and 4 is asking us to do is to take these first 3 characters and just replace them with commas. And I know it says top 100 books, but in his later exam, sometimes it'll say top 100, but it'll actually be like 102 or 104. So you don't want to hard code in like, you don't want to hard code that as your total number of iterations. So while loop is a better choice, just because every time we see a period, we're going to turn that into a comma. So let's call the book string variable. And this method is really important. Like you're going to get this drilled into your head. If you didn't already get it drilled into your head taking Java, it's called index of, which spelled wrong. Index of. So basically what that does is it searches for a character in this variable, okay? You type in whatever character, it's going to search for that. If you get that character, it's going to return a number. And if it doesn't find the character, like that character doesn't exist, it's going to return the value -1. For the purpose of this class, you don't need to know the integer part of it. You just need to know if the number exists in the variable or not. Not number, if the character. So like I'm going to say index of period because we're trying to find every instance of a period. And we want to say if it's not equal to -1, because that's basically checking every time it exists. If it's equal to -1, that means it's not there. Don't execute the while loop. Okay, so as long as this condition is true, then we're going to do everything that's in this bracket. So now this is a part where we're actually going to replace it. So let's say it also says we're going to replace it with the comma in the same string. So we're going to keep the book string variable the same. So book string is equal to book string. Okay, and then there's another method. It's like pretty self-explanatory, some of these methods. It's just kind of like you're going to remember the more you practice. So it's a replace method, which is like super self-explanatory, you know. And basically with replace, you enter in 2 arguments. So I'm going to put my first argument and my second argument, and those have to be separated by a comma. So the first argument is what the original character was. So for us, that's the period. And what we want to do is we want to turn it into a comma. So let's go into the second argument and turn it into a comma. Okay. So essentially, deliverable number 2 is out of the way. We just said, check for every instance of this character as long as this condition is true, meaning the character exists in the variable, then perform this action, which is take the variable and just replace every instance of this character with this character. Not too bad, right? Anybody got any questions about like how we are doing while loop or why we chose while loop? If you don't have any questions, like don't force yourself to ask. You can also ask at the end, or if you don't even want to ask, you could just message me. But you know, I want to give you guys an opportunity. Anybody have questions?
I have a question.
All right. Yeah, for sure. What's up?
So I understand the why you used while, and I understand why you used book string, but why did you put index of? Like, is that so that we can recognize, like the program can recognize like where every period is?
Yeah. So basically, index of is searching. Like technically, index of is searching for the location of this character.
Okay.
But in terms of job, like in terms of this class, you don't care, like you don't need to worry about where exactly the character is. You just want to make sure the character is there, right? Like you want to know
Mhm.
that it exists. So you could also say like it's greater than -1, because if it's greater than -1, that means that, you know, it has to be in the text area. I just like to use it not equal to. Does that make more sense?
Yes, but as far as putting the -1, what is the function of the -1?
So -1 means that the character like doesn't exist. So if it does, if it displays a -1, that means that the period isn't there. And so we don't need to
Oh,
perform this action. So as long
okay.
as, you know, it's not -1, that means
Oh, then we
period
can
is
apply this
there.
action.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, okay, okay. All right, thank you.
Mhm. Okay, so number 3 and number 4, like the deliverables, is just asking us for the same exact thing as number 2. So I'll go through one more time. So we're going into this while loop and we're saying in the variable book string, call the index of function and search for by. And as long as by is existing, and then we're just going to copy and paste it. However, there is an error in here that could really trip you up if you didn't catch it. So I said index of by, right? Because it says right here, replace the string by with a comma. But if you look at this text area, you know, these are names, titles, and authors. Like, what if, oh, right here, like this book has the 2 letters by in it. This isn't what we want to replace with a comma though, right? We just want to replace over here this by Jonathan Smith. So make sure to include a space before and after, because JavaScript doesn't know like we're looking for the word by. All it sees is the character B and the character Y. So we want to clarify that it's like its own word, right? So that could have tripped you up. Hopefully it didn't trip anyone up and you guys all caught it. But that's just one thing to look out for. And he even gives us a hint because he says right here, 4-byte string by. So like that's 4 bytes right there because you got space before and after. So that's just something to look out for. And then deliverable number 4 is just saying replace all of the open parentheses with a comma. So I'm gonna just copy this. And we're gonna say instead of the word by, open parentheses, open parentheses. Okay, so deliverables 1 through 4, and we just got it out of the way. Pretty straightforward. Hopefully that's straightforward. If not, feel free to ask any questions. Like I can walk through it over and again and again if it'll clear it up for y'all. And so he's telling us the resulting string, book string, is going to contain data for the 100 books separated by the closing character. Okay, so basically what we just did was right here, instead of the period, it's a comma. And right here, instead of that, it's a comma. And same thing for that. That's all we did. So now if you want to look at this text area, all of the books are kind of grouped in its own little section and they're all separated with this closing parentheses, which is a really important thing to note because our next step is telling us split the data in this variable on the closing parentheses. Okay, so split function is a really important function in TP. So we're going to create a variable called y, or y, y, and we are going to take our book string object and we're going to use the split function. And basically what split does is that every time it encounters the argument that we're putting in here, so for us, it would be that closing parentheses, every time it sees it, it's going to create an array of substring. So essentially, it's going to see this closing parentheses and everything that comes before it becomes its own array. And then it's going to, you know, go through, oh, it sees another closing parentheses, so it becomes its own array. So now we have 100 arrays, like every book and all the information with it is typed together in an array. So that's what split does. Okay, so deliverable number 5, all we're doing is creating these, we're creating 100 arrays. And you guys know, like, if you want to refer to something now, say if I want to refer to Pride and Prejudice, I can say, okay, Y at position 1, right? And then it's going to call just this information. Now I'm not going to get the entire text data, because that's what bookstring was. Bookstring was giving us back this entire thing. But now now with Y, we can return a specific location. Okay, so that's deliverable number 5. Honestly, like, oh, it's only 150. Okay. So deliverable number 6. Okay, so now we're getting into the bulk, not even the bulk really, but we're getting into, it might get a little confusing. Question number 6, where we're going to be creating a table. This is going to be 4 columns and 101 row table as follows. So the heading row has been provided for you in the string name heads. So we're going to create a variable up here. Right, yeah. Or actually not here. We already created the variable for our table. So we are going to add on to that variable. So what this does, this is a plus equals to operator. If you guys like haven't seen this before, you probably have seen like OS equals to OS plus something. But for readability, I just think this is easier. So OS, this is our, remember we made our table. So we're going to add on to table. And he says it's called heads. It's actually called head 1 on his code. So I'm just going to leave it as head 1. Okay. And that's this right here. So we don't have to hard code in a row with a background color of green and these rank, title, author, downloads. That's what Dr. Parks just made for us so generously. Okay. And then in the following 100 rows, place rank, title, author, and download count. Okay, so we want to have all this data displayed so clean and organized like this, but we don't want to manually refer to each position. Remember, we created this array. We don't want to manually refer to that. Let's create something that'll simplify this process and do it for us, like very quickly, efficiently. How can we do that? Let's try a for loop. And we can actually use a for loop because we know how many times this thing is going to, how many iterations we're going to have. So in our for loop, we're going to say I is equal to 0. I is going to be less than something, and then I plus plus. Okay, so what is I going to be equal to? Well, let's see. We have, 100 of these rows, but we also know that this variable Y is storing the length of every single book as its own array, right? So let's just say Y dot length, right? Because the length of Y is literally all of this. We don't need to hard code. And also Dr. Parks doesn't like it if you hard code. If you want to say I is less than 100, you should like have a reference and call the length of that. Okay, so this initial for loop, as long as this condition is true, once again, as long as I is less than the total length of all these arrays, then, keep on doing what we're about to do. So what we're about to do is add a row. Let me go back to the steps. So in the following 100 rows, place rank, title, author, download count, 4 cells. So whenever you're building tables, the first thing we do, after opening up our table tag, is opening up a row tag. So let's add on to the OS, and we're going to say TR. So TR. So basically, at every time this is true, let's open up a row tag. Nothing in it, it's just a blank row. Okay. Now we're going to create a variable, and he doesn't say it here. He doesn't explicitly tell us to do this, but this is just something you got to figure out, because when we create our cells, we want one to show up on its own, right? And we want a modest proposal to show up on its own, Jonathan Swift. However, if I'm going to refer to, say Y at position I, then it's going to give me the entire thing. And we don't want that. We want to call each one individually. So let's create a variable called temp. And what that's going to do is we can refer to the position, and we're going to do the split function again. And this time, remember, we just did all of this manipulating. Like, what was that for? Now we have a common character that we can split by because we just, replaced all of those other miscellaneous characters with a comma. Is that the right word? So this second split, what it's doing is at whatever position this is. So let me zoom in. So let's say, for example, we're at I is equal to 0. So temp is basically saying at Y is equal to 0, or at the 0 position of Y, look in here and split it on this comma. So now 1 becomes its own character. 1 becomes its, holy God. 1 becomes its own, and I don't want to say array, even though what split does is it does create array of substring, but it might be a little bit confusing to think about like 1 is its own array, because normally when you think about array, you think of it's holding a lot of characters. So I just like to say it becomes its own like entity, its own item. So you can refer to 1 separately, you can refer to a modest proposal separately. That's essentially what we're doing. And it's very, very important that if you're doing a split function again, because remember, why we already did a split function, the second split has to be using an array. You can't just say like y dot split at the comma. You have to refer to the individual like position. And this might sound confusing as I'm explaining it right now. I have something that might like make it easier for you guys to look at versus just hearing me say it. But I'll probably show that like after. Okay, so we just created this variable and we opened up our row. We created this variable. Now we have to do something to create all of those individual cells. So let's create another for loop. And we're going to say j is equal to 0. J is less than something. J plus plus. So what's j going to be less than? Because this for loop is focusing on building these rows. The next for loop is going to focus on building the cells right here. So this temp actually would be a great, what temp.length, that would be a great thing to use, because the length of temp is the exact number that we need to build the cells, right? Because we have 4 attributes right here. And since we're going to be building a cell, we want it to be less than the length of this variable. Like that wasn't a very good explanation, but I'm gonna keep going. So now we're inside this nested for loop. So let's add on to OS and let's open up a table tag, which is TD, or not table tag, cell tag, TD. Okay, now we're gonna have to leave the HTML because once again, like all the stuff that's in yellow, that is string. That's stuff that we want to have like show up. We want to have that on our web page. But what I'm about to input is JavaScript, and you can't put HTML and JavaScript together. So the way that you concatenate it, if you guys remember that word, is you just, leave the double quotes and add a plus sign. And then we're going to add our JavaScript, which in this case would just be temp at j. So this is populating the cell with the JavaScript that is, so like, for example, temp at 0 would be right here. And then temp at 1 would be right here, and then 2 and 3. And then we're going to add and close our cell tag. Okay, so basically, I can write it down too. Is equal to 1. Temp at 1 is equal to modest proposal, whatever. So essentially, once we opened up this row, we created another for loop to automatically automatically build these cells. And then what this is doing is making it so that we can fill it in with the correct values.
I have a
So,
question.
mhm,
So you did the for the second for loop right there. So that's to
mhm,
create the cells, right? Or is that to
yes.
populate them?
So this is just creating the cells. Like this for loop is essentially saying, this is giving us a condition for us to populate the cells. So
Okay.
right here isn't, yeah, sorry, were you gonna ask
And
something else?
yeah, I was gonna say, so if that, how does it know like the temp dot length? How does it know to only like stop at 4 cells?
Because, okay, let me like word this so I don't like go on a ramble. So remember how we created this variable temp and it's split like the y like element
Uh-huh.
at the comma.
Gotcha.
So when you split at a comma or when you split at something, you are creating separate arrays.
Mm-hmm.
And so what temp does, like, okay, hold up. So just imagine right here, we're zoomed in onto like only this first part.
Gotcha.
Okay.
Okay.
So it basically says that at this first array, we have 4 separate elements. We have one, a modest proposal, Jonathan Swift, and 1496, right? Because we have these
Gotcha.
3 commas separating it. So now once we're in this nested for loop, it's only focusing, we're still only focusing on
Seeing
this
on
one
that little,
array.
got you. So
Yeah.
it's doing, okay. Thank you.
So it's going to open up our cell and it's going to say temp at 0, which in this case is going to be 1, then close the cell. And then it's going to leave the for loop. And remember, nested for loops always happen like it's going to do this for loop and then this for loop is going to keep on executing until it's
over,
no
and
longer
then it's gonna go
true,
out.
and then it's going to go back, right?
Yeah.
So it's going to say temp at 0, leave, okay, j is equal to 1. And then it's going to do it, j is equal to 2, and then j is equal to 3, which is 1496. And
Makes
so
sense.
once that's done, and I didn't include it yet, but that's a good question you asked. But once that's done, the next thing I was going to do is close our row, and then it'll leave and it'll go to the next position, which would be 2. Does that make sense?
Yes, that makes sense. Thank you.
Okay, yeah. So yeah, so I feel like when I was talking while I was doing it, I was kind of just like saying stuff, but once you're in this nested for loop, just remember to like hone in on you're getting very specific. You're no longer looking at this large group of data. So now we're going to leave the nested for loop because we just populated all of our cells. And one thing that I want to do is remember we are keeping track of the total downloads. So I'm going to actually add that right here because that way, once we leave this last cell, we can just add on to it. We don't have to wait until we created our entire table and then search for all the instance. That like slows your code down a lot. So let's take our total variable, total plus equal to, and what is the what is that location? That is temp at 3, because all of our downloads are in this one column and that is the 3rd position. However, we're trying to add these numbers, right? And the way that the numbers have been given to us is in a string data type. And so basically what it's saying right now is just add these characters. So it'll give us 1496, 1414. Like it's not actually adding them, it's just putting the numbers together. That's not what we want. We want to mathematically add them. So we need to convert the data type. And the way you do that is by using parse int. So parse int basically takes whatever's at that location, or whatever the characters are, and converts it into an integer if it's able to. So this does need to be a number, and it'll just convert it from a string data type to a integer data type.
You don't need to declare the total variable, or did you do that already and I wasn't paying attention?
Yeah, I declared it up here.
Thank you.
You could yeah. Honestly, like you don't have to say variable. I know Dr. Parks wasn't doing his answer, but I always do it just because it's like, clear. Okay, now we are done populating those cells. We did our total downloads. So let's just close this row. Like we're done with the row. All right. And remember to stay in the scope of this initial for loop though. So actually, I'm going to pull up the other thing that I did. It does give like a clear explanation of this, but there's only a little bit, there's only 2 more lines of code. So let's see. So it's going to go through this whole thing. We populated all the rows, filled everything in. So now let's close out this table because we don't got any more work to do. And the way you do that is you use closing table tag. And then on the bottom, we wanted to display this total downloads right here. So we're going to say, we're going to use a paragraph tag and make sure it's bolded because he had it bolded. And then we're just going to say total downloads is equal to, and then we want to display that total downloads variable, right? And remember, it's JavaScript, so we have to leave the quotations, do a plus sign, and let's do total. But so remember, now all of this stuff is about to be displayed, right? Our OS is what's going to be displayed. And like your web page is only going to display HTML. It's only going to display string data type. So we have to reverse what we just did here back into its original data type, which was string. So it's pretty simple. You just say .toString. And then we're going to have to close out the bold tag and the P tag, paragraph tag, like so. And then, so that was following the table, place total number of books downloaded for the day. So total.toString. And then place the results in div block with the ID equaling to P1_out. So this is also a standard. So like the first question and the last question are usually like always the same 2 things. So if you just remember like how to do it, it's very straightforward. But basically we're going to call that ID. So P1_out. And then we're going to call this inner HTML. And what that does is that it accesses all of our HTML from this current source or current document. And it's going to place that, save that into our OS. Okay. So number 7. So, all right. So essentially we just did the whole first question. We opened up our table, we added our heading, we checked for every instance that we have a period character, every instance we have the word by or an open parentheses, we're going to replace all of those with a comma. Then we're going to create a separate variable which creates arrays of substring based off of how many splits. So how many times we find a closing parentheses, create an array. And we call that Y. And then this for loop right here populates our table rows. We created another variable in order to split within each array, do a secondary split so that we can populate our cells individually. And then after that, we counted a total and converted the downloads into an integer and added them to our total, and then closed our row. We closed our table and had a display of the total downloads. And all of that is done in function P1. Okay, let's pray this works. I mean, we're going to copy it. We're going to copy it. We're going to go to Dr. Parks' code. So as y'all see, I had tested it out earlier and it is called head 1. So we're going to take that out. We can copy our text. Okay. And then we're going to save it. Where's the mouse? Hold up. Okay, my Sublime is loading.
I'm new to JavaScript. Like I've done Java before, but not JavaScript. So like when you're
Mhm.
declaring the variables, you're just using the var.
Yeah.
So like what's the deal? Like you didn't have to use like integer and string back in Java. So what does the var stand for?
So with JavaScript, it's not entirely like it's not necessary to declare what the data type is because like for example with total it knows that it's going to be an integer because we put in an integer value. You could still have totals equal to 0.0 and it knows that it's going to be a float or double, but it's not required to have the data type in when you're declaring a variable in JavaScript.
Gotcha.
I personally think JavaScript is like simpler, more simple. Oh, okay. I didn't even show you guys. Okay, so basically what we did is we're going to right click, open in browser, and I just did it, but I didn't tell you guys. So now we're on the answers and it's fall parks. We're going to click execute. And as you guys can see, like it executed, right? But there's this weird, like it looks blocky. That's because I made my cell spacing 3 and it has everything and it has total downloads. So it did work. And let's just say, was that here? Let's go back and we'll change it to 0. If I save it, open it up again. Jeez. I don't know if you guys are still having this internet problem, but like it's literally so bad for me. But anyways, I changed it to 0 and those blocks wouldn't be there. It would look like a normal table. What are you doing? So yeah, that's basically like what I wanted to show you guys, that it could still change. Oh, maybe it'll change. Oh, it changed. Okay, see, no more blocks. Oh, this is a new one. Y'all, I'm so sorry because this internet is really tripping me up. And there's one thing I do want to show you. So like, is this part clear for everyone, or would anybody like me to go over it again? Because I did make sort of a visual, like a side by side you could look at so you can see exactly what's happening. Would you guys like me to share that, or do you guys think this is kind of clear?
It would be really helpful if you could share it.
Great. Thank you for saying that, because
Sure.
I was hoping someone would say it so that I could show it because I worked on it. I'm gonna have to go. I did email it to myself, so I'm gonna have to pull it up. Wait. Bermuda info. Okay. Let's see. Right here, right here. Sheesh. Y'all don't look at my emails though. Okay. So it loaded. Let's side by side this with our code. Okay. So this is what we started off with. This is, I just reformatted it so it's easier to look at, but this is essentially the same thing as this. And I just chose the first 4 books, so it's easy to look at. Okay. So what this while loop does is, like I already mentioned, a while loop is as long as this condition is true, we're going to do this action. And so after these are all performed, this is what it's going to look like. You have 1 comma, book title, comma, Jonathan Swift, comma. Okay. Then we did this. We did create a variable y and split it on this closing parentheses. So you need to remember that when you use the split function, this y variable is storing arrays. It's not just storing like all the data together. So I highlighted it. So now if I want to refer to y, I have to, like, I can't just say y like dot whatever, y dot index of. Like if I'm trying to do anything, I have to refer to a specific location within that array. So now this first group is 0, 1, 2, and 3. So if I wanted to say y at 13, I would get whatever like the entire group of data is for that location. Okay. Then we created this for loop. We did another split. So at a certain, position of Y, we're going to do a further split, and ignore this part, like this temp 0, temp 1. That's wrong. I rewrote it here. But the next split is going to even further separate the items. So now 1 is called on its own, and a modest proposal is called on its own. So when I open up the row, because remember, every time this is true, I open up the row, I'm going to perform this action. So at I is equal to 0, we're right here. We're only in this like pink highlight. So I'm going to open a row just for that section. And then I'm going to do a second split only on this section again. Like, I wish I could. Okay, only on a modest proposal section. Then the nested for loop is going to create a cell specifically for each of these groups. So at this point in time, we're on one book. Okay. Does that kind of clear it up? Or do y'all have any other questions about like anything on here? And it's 2:15. I wanted to spend the last 15 minutes like going over questions that I just did, and then also talk a bit more about questions y'all have about the class in general, because a lot of people have been messaging me, and I kind of want to clear it up for everyone. So if you guys don't have any more questions about this, the recording will be on YouTube if you want to rewatch it at any point. And I'll try to include timestamps too. Like I learned how to do that today. Sheesh. But yeah, if you guys don't have any other questions, or if you do, you could ask any questions about this.
I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so for head 1, could you have just wrote H1?
No, H1 is an HTML tag. So that's specifically changing the format. We're not trying to call on tag. We're actually trying to call on.
So it's basically JavaScript, right?
Yeah, that's JavaScript. Because see, Dr. Parks made this variable, and in it, he had his own heading. So we're literally just referring to that.
Okay, and at the end, you use the paragraph tag, but couldn't you have used the caption tag and set it to below the table?
You can also do a break tag, but a break tag, it's like, hold up. Break tag adds a bit more space. Paragraph tag is like when you want to put something directly underneath the table. But that's not too like, if you use another tag, as long as it's underneath the table, it's not that big of a deal.
Okay. So probably he wouldn't care.
Yeah.
Okay.
As long as it's displaying like this, and as long as you didn't hard code in, like I know no one probably is going to go through and like add these numbers up, but he really doesn't like it when you hard code in stuff. So always just, where'd it go? Make sure to refer to this variable, but as far as the HTML and formatting, he doesn't really care.
Okay, thanks.
And like on his tests, so I mean, obviously they're multiple choice now from what he said, but you know how you just copy pasted it in? So in order to make it work, you still have to type in the other stuff on top, right? Like if you wanted to check for yourself.
Yeah. Like, do you mean like when I was doing like typing in my
before you started, like, above, like he has the style.
Oh, like all of this stuff?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Gotcha.
Oh, so wait, what was your question?
So what I was trying to say is like, okay, back in Java, you had to type in like I even forgot, like in the beginning and at the top, just to make the code work, you have to type in.
Oh, yeah. So when you're doing these practice exams, you don't have to do any of that. You literally just follow these steps, and he has like the entire web page formatted already. So as long as, remember how I put right here, I did this function P1. So he has the same thing right here. So that like literally everything that's in here will represent what's going to execute once you hit this P1 button. So all you need to do is have the code that follows this along and just copy it into the right location on his web page, and then it'll execute. You don't need to worry about like formatting the web page or setting it up like that.
Okay, so like if we wanted to practice on our own, where would we go and paste it? like specifically?
So say like if you wanted to do another practice exam on your own.
Uh-huh.
So let's go to another. So basically, yeah, I can show you guys how you can save his files and like access it. So basically you can save as, and then on your text editor,
Or you can just open with got you.
yeah. So he has it right here, function P1. So you would just
Just
literally
copy and paste it in there.
yeah. And sometimes he has code that you can't delete. For example, like for us, it was head 1. You have to make sure it's on there. And so sometimes he'll have a lot of code and then he'll do a comment and say answers start here and you'll copy your answer there.
Got you.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Do you guys have any other questions about the exam? And then if not, I can stop sharing and well, actually, I'm gonna stop sharing. That's the question. If you guys had any questions about the class specifically, one thing I want to say is so I took his class last semester, and so we were the first semester to do a multiple choice exam. And so it was a bit difficult because our coding officer, he had like no idea what's going to be on, like what kind of stuff Dr. Parks would ask us. However, since I took it, I have a better idea. I did ask Dr. Parks to send me that exam or at least like release it, and he said no. So we're still like, working on that. But for the most part, I will be doing these exams, like coding times twice a week. And then I'm also working on doing multiple choice questions for you guys, since that's what your exam is going to be on. So I think tomorrow or Thursday, I will release the ones I have for the free week so that you guys can all take a look at it. And that will just help you because it is really important. If you guys are able to do this literally on your own and like walk someone through it, then you should be fine, because this stuff is more complicated than what the multiple choice questions are. But basically the way my multiple choice questions are created, it's going to be asking you questions about the exams that we did for that coding time. And then also making sure you guys know concepts that are like, he asked a lot of questions about Java as well as HTML. So this midterm is definitely like straightforward, as long as you keep up with if you're attending coding times and you're going through these exams, and then also being able to answer these questions in like a multiple choice setting. And is that a hand raise? Did you raise your hand? You could ask your question if you have one.
So are we for certain that this will be a multiple choice midterm? Like he's going to keep it that way? Because when we continuously ask him, he changes his answer like every time.
Like he tells you it's not going to be multiple choice?
Yeah, he either says it will be multiple choice or it's going to be coding or possibly both. So I was wondering if you would have a straightforward answer for that.
That's kind of funny. Like literally, I remember in my class, okay, he says that kind of stuff, and then he doesn't actually like hold up to it, because I remember when we were in his class, he would be going over things and we ask him if it's going to be on the exam, and he says it will, and it never was. Like if you guys went over ASCII characters or things like that, and he told us like we'd have to answer questions like that. I am pretty sure it's still gonna be multiple choice, and I even asked him myself, because I was like, I need to prepare material for the students. So like, are you going to keep it the same format? And he said he would. And he hasn't mentioned anything about you guys doing assignments, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's most
Okay.
likely gonna.
Yeah, he hasn't.
Okay. Yeah. So it's most likely gonna stay multiple choice. But I can reach out to him again. Like I don't care messaging him. I know he hates like when people try to communicate with him or ask him questions, but I can definitely reach out to him again and get a straightforward answer.
And are his exams on CASA or the lockdown?
He just does it on, what is it? Blackboard lockdown.
Got you.
I have a question.
Mhm.
So, you know how Java's exams were mostly, well, for me, I felt like it was a lot of like syntax stuff and it was very straightforward and simple. So, with this exam, is it kind of going to resemble like the same multiple choice format, like where it's, not too overly complicated?
Yes. So I definitely think the midterm was straightforward. Like he didn't ask any complicated conceptual questions. I remember a lot, like I remembered a lot of Java questions. So, sometimes they'll give you a for loop and it's going to say what's the execution of this. So if it's like less than 10, I plus equal to 5, and then it'll have something and then you say, what's the output? It was like questions like that. But then I've been asking other people who are taking the exams just so that I can have more things to work with. And people remember a lot of HTML syntax questions. So there weren't any questions that were confusing conceptually. There were some questions that it seemed like there's no right answer, like coding wise. But yeah, concept, because I feel like in Java, there was a lot of questions about concepts, and I didn't have that same experience in this class.
Okay, thank you.
Mhm. If y'all don't have any other questions, you can feel free to leave. Thank y'all for joining and like being patient, because I was having some of like the technical difficulties. But I'll be here on Thursday at the same time, and we'll be doing the second question. And then we'll also go over the practice, like multiple choice questions. But yeah, oh, and also if you guys want, like one thing I'd highly recommend, oh yeah, there is a Coding Times group me that if it's not already sent out, it will be sent out. And that's specifically for MISSO members. And then there also will be a committee a group me for my committee. If you guys are interested in joining my committee and you guys would like to help me like go over Coding Times together and get some more help, then I'd highly recommend it. Harsh, do you have a question?
Yeah, I was gonna ask, like he said that there wouldn't be like any assignments, so and as of right now, it's just been like 2 weeks, so he's barely just gone over HTML. He hasn't even just started JavaScript that much. So if we wanted to
Mhm.
keep up and practice, what do you suggest?
So I would suggest doing his practice exams, because personally, like when I was in this class, I had no idea what to do. And then my friend directed me to the MISSO Coding Times. And that's why like I felt like I did good on the exams. I can say that because I went to Coding Times. If I didn't make it, I would always watch recordings and I would
Mhm.
do the exams myself. And then another thing was I would like walk someone else through the exam. So like one thing I wanted to do with you guys, if you guys decide to join MISSO, is you guys can like schedule a time where we'll meet and then you'll actually walk me through like practice exam and explain the concepts, just so you can confirm like you know exactly what you're doing and what's happening. And when you do that, like let me tell you, when I was taking the exam, I could explain the questions like I was answering. I didn't feel like, oh, it could go this way or it could go this way. Like it was a lot easier to read through. And also just understanding like when you can read the way he asked questions on a written exam, it's easy to take his multiple choice, because sometimes his wording is weird. He has very specific, like, he asked for specific things. And I became comfortable with it earlier because I was really like, I did the practice exams. And then I will be doing a video, like a coding time of HTML specifically. So like if you don't know any HTML, it's like breaking down everything. And I would highly recommend if you can attend that and even just build like your own HTML web page and use all of the tags and understand how all of the tags work. That was also extremely helpful for me.
All right, I got you. Thanks.
Mhm. And do y'all have any general questions about like the coding, or not coding times, like committees, or I'm also good doing one-on-ones. Yeah, literally like I'm on campus, so I'll be here to help you guys out anytime and any sort of help you need. Because
Could you
that's what
also share
MISSO is
your
for.
sorry, could you also share your Google Doc with us? Like the
Oh,
one
like the visual that I
yeah.
that I showed? Yeah. I
Okay.
can. What I'll do is since it's free week, I'll be able to share that with everyone. Somebody asked suggestions for practicing Java. So that's another thing I would highly recommend. Like on his previous exams, he has like specific Java functions that you need to know. another thing is we have an amazing Java officer. You could go to his coding times as well. But the type of Java that you need to know for TP, it's like he doesn't switch it up a lot. It's pretty standard across most of his exams. So that's why I'm saying his old exams do give you a lot of context of the type of stuff he looks for. So for example, like I was doing the index of method. That's very like you'll see that a lot. You'll see the split method a lot and things like that. And then if there's anything that is just like more confusing, or I mean anything that's confusing as you're working through those, feel free to ask me, or Hayden is the Java officer and he's a TA. So you got resources on resources. And the next question, how do we schedule one-on-one coding? I mean, one-on-one tutoring. So I'll be sending out like one of those calendar invites on the TP GroupMe for MISSO members. And so on there, you can choose a time. And if none of those times ever work for you, you can message me. And if you want to do it virtually, we could do virtual one-on-one, or like I can meet you at the library or something. And it's honestly up to you, like what you want to accomplish at the tutoring, but I'll be sending out like the times available for MISSO members. And it's 2:30. So if you really like, if you have somewhere else to go or you want to leave, feel free to do so. That was kind of a lot I wanted to mention. And I know there'll be different students on here for Thursday. So yeah, but be sure to attend Thursdays as well. Thank you. Thank you for joining and for your interest.
Cool.
I
Thanks,
could.
Mahan.
No problem. Thanks for coming, Alex.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mayan.
You're welcome. All right. Oh, wait,
you.
it's still recording. Let me think. Email notice.